Brooke moved to a city from the countryside, looking for a beautiful life. She had never liked the backwoods and never intended to be a farmer or a milkmaid there. She dreamed of becoming a businessman's wife, to get rid of all the problems and to live like a queen. Barely finishing school, Brooke left her parents' home. Despite her poor grades, she still managed to enroll in a college in a nearby city. Dear Brooke tried to make her dream come true with her irrepressible energy. However, her attempts to attract a wealthy fiancé failed one by one. The girl was perplexed because she considered herself very beautiful. But finally, she was lucky enough to meet Dennis. Brooke thought that now everything would be fine. She had gotten the lucky ticket, but it wasn't. Dennis disappeared after a few months of dating, as soon as he heard about her unplanned pregnancy. Brooke did not know what to do, because now she was sure that with a baby, she would never find a husband. Her parents did not support her in this difficult moment either. "We told you to concentrate on your studies, and only then, everything else. Why are you so silly? Your father and I can barely make ends meet, so don't count on us. We don't have time to help you with the baby's upbringing," said her mother firmly. After these words, Brooke felt very lonely and decided to terminate the pregnancy. But even then, everything did not go according to plan. It was too late and impossible to do. The girl had no choice but to accept the situation. "Okay, what can I do? I'll have to give birth, but I'll give up the baby in the maternity hospital," she decided. Despite her youth, pregnancy was difficult. Constant toxemia, sudden fatigue, and headaches made Brooke feel terrible, and she could not accept her fate. That morning, Brooke began to have severe abdominal pain, and she easily guessed what it was. She called her friend Megan to help her get to the maternity hospital. Megan did not share Brooke's views on the baby, but could not change her mind. Labor was hard, and so was the pregnancy. Maybe it was Brooke's punishment for her bad thoughts and actions. She could not see the newborn baby's face very well because of the intense stress she had just experienced. But she noticed how the doctors looked at each other perplexedly. Something must be wrong, she thought, but she was so exhausted that she couldn't ask what was wrong. The baby was not brought to Brooke's ward for a suspiciously long time. Finally, in the evening, a nurse came in with the boy in her arms. "Don't worry," she said timidly. "The baby is fine. There is one problem." Brooke looked up and gasped. Oh no, he had eyes that looked in different directions. A terrible strabismus. Brooke had wanted to give up on her child before, but this problem did not leave even a shadow of a doubt about the decision. The same day, she wrote an application to give up her newborn son. Everyone at the maternity hospital persuaded her to take the baby. "Your son has a good chance of a full recovery. Don't leave him because you'll regret it later," said the head doctor of the maternity hospital. But Brooke was adamant. She was sure that if the baby would be with her, she would work until her old age for a penny and suffer with a disabled child. This was not the life she dreamed of. For 2 more days, Brooke was in the maternity hospital. The medical staff hoped that her maternal instinct would awaken in her, but nothing like that happened. She soon left without saying goodbye to anyone, as if she was a criminal. What a pity that our persuasions have not worked, she thought. She will understand later what she had done, but it will be too late. "Well, let's register the child to an orphanage," said Dr. Marshall, the head doctor. "Wait, don't rush. Please, I want to take this child into my family," said Dr. Julia Scott timidly. She was an obstetrician-gynecologist and was respected not only by her colleagues, but also by her patients. That was no surprise. She was competent, responsive, and good-natured. Only one thing overshadowed her life. God had not given her children, and she was already in her 40s. Julia had been married for more than 10 years, with a never-ending series of medical examinations, analysis, and treatments for infertility, but unfortunately, all in vain. Despite enormous hopes, the pregnancy never happened. Julia had heard many stories of couples who had adopted a child from an orphanage, and then God gave them their own child. She had also read on the internet that if the adopted child had a physical handicap, she would definitely get pregnant. She had never believed any of that human chatter before, but now, when she was truly desperate, Julia was ready to believe anything. When she learned that one of the mothers had decided to give up her baby with strabismus, she immediately thought, why not adopt him? Julia told her husband everything, and he agreed, mostly because his wife was just obsessed with the idea of having a child. And so, sitting in front of a surprised Dr. Marshall, Julia explained sadly, "You see, my husband and I don't have children. I can't get pregnant. We've done a lot to make this happy moment happen, but it didn't work out, so we decided to adopt." "I admire your decision, Julia," said Dr. Marshall. "Not everyone would dare to take an infant, and even with a problem. But will you cope? Will you have enough strength for it, Dr. Marshall?" "Yes, we will try very, very hard. We've already found a clinic where they can do surgery on the baby's eyes," said Julia, satisfied with the support of the head doctor. "Good for you. Then we'll act. Adopting a child is very difficult, but I hope it will end well. For my part, I promised my assistance and help. In addition, the child is not completely healthy, so the chances are great." The head doctor assured Julia. Julia came out in high spirits. She is going to have a baby. At that time, she did not know how many difficulties were ahead of her. Julia and her husband had to go through several rounds of bureaucratic hell before Zachary, as they called their son, would come home and be a full-fledged member of their family. The future parents withstood all of this, and Zachary became their real son. Everything was happy, and the baby was very lucky to find parents at once. After all, a child's memory does not retain memories of the first months of life. It was not easy for Julia and Kevin in the first months of life with the baby. They had always lived solely for themselves, and now they had to forget about calm. The baby constantly demanded attention to himself. In addition, it was necessary to treat strabismus, because the operation must be done before the child is 5 years old for a favorable outcome. Julia was setting herself up with a positive attitude. After all, other families somehow coped with small children and were happy. But soon she sensed that Kevin began to succumb to dejection. He always agreed with his wife's decisions, but deep down he did not understand how he could feel love for a non-native child. But Julia was so desperate to have a child that he would do anything for her. "I hope everything will be all right," thought Kevin. It happened contrary to all doctors' diagnoses and prognoses, but no one, neither Julia nor Kevin, understood the main thing. They had been given this gift purely because of Zachary. Julia and Kevin's new happiness put an end to the boy's happiness. Everything suddenly changed. He began to feel that his mother didn't need him, and his father became annoyed with him. He tried with all his might to do something nice for his mommy. He constantly hugged her, climbed on her lap, and Julia began to pull away from the child. Kevin stopped playing with him, and after a while, he completely stopped paying attention to him. Julia was euphoric for the fact that she was pregnant and would have a baby. She, of course, fulfilled her obligations to Zachary. She fed him, took him outside, dressed him, but her love was gone. Disappeared. Dissolved. Zachary was worried. He started to cry and wet himself a lot at night. It irritated Kevin, and he even scolded Zachary for it loudly. The child did not understand why everything had changed, why his mother did not love him but only yelled, and his father did not pay attention to him. And soon Kevin, for the first time, hinted to Julia that Zachary should return to an orphanage. Day after day, he gave dozens of arguments, but the main one was that they would have their own desired child. Julia did not argue with her husband. Alas, she realized only now that she loved the unborn child much more than Zachary. A joint decision was made. They filed papers to cancel the adoption. Not understanding anything, the little boy was sitting on a chair in a strange house where he had been brought, and behind the closed door was the trial going on. Zachary looked around and glanced at the strangers passing by, and they threw sympathetic glances at him now and then. His parents didn't come out for a long time. Zachary became frightened, and he shuddered at the slamming doors of the nearby rooms. After the trial, Kevin did not even look in the direction of the baby, and Julia came up to him with some unfamiliar woman and said, "Zachary, you're going with this woman." Without turning around, she quickly followed her husband. Zachary, realizing his parents were leaving, screamed and ran after them. The woman grabbed his arm, and he, understanding that something terrible had happened, began to bite her, hit her, and lash out. "Mommy, Mommy, don't go away," he shouted, but Julia did not hear him. She and her husband quietly got into the car and drove home. Zachary was brought to another scary house. He entered a large room with children just like him, and quickly ran to the corner. He sat down, covering his little face with his hands as if to shield himself from everything. Zachary imagined that he would fall asleep, then he would open his eyes and his mother would be there again. She would read him a story and give him a kiss, and Daddy would play with him like a horse on his neck. But of course the miracle never happened. Days went by, but his mother never came back to pick him up. Zachary cried very often. The little boy did not know that in such a short life, he had already been betrayed twice. He never played with other children and ate very little. Only one elderly tutor, Mrs. Morgan, was able to persuade him to eat. She had so much love and warmth in her heart that Zachary just melted away during her shift. Mrs. Morgan would put him on her lap, rocking him and saying, "My poor baby, why are you being punished like this?" But God sees everything. Zachary, of course, did not understand. I understand her lamentations, but he usually felt warmth and good, and he fell asleep in her arms. Soon, Mrs. Morgan found out by chance that God's wrath came upon Julia and her husband. As suddenly as the news of her pregnancy had once done, the birth began much prematurely and was very difficult. Julia gave birth to a stillborn child. Right in the maternity hospital, she wanted to poison herself with pills, but they managed to save her. Later, she remembered Zachary and wanted to bring him back, but she faced a harsh rejection. Julie and Kevin could not get over what had happened and began to drink, eventually losing their jobs. To make a living, they had to sell their apartment and move to the village to an old house where Kevin's parents used to live. Yes, justice prevailed, but it was not better for little Zachary. Mrs. Morgan, who was not indifferent to children's grief, understood that. As for all children, the only way for Zachary to have a happy life was to find a new family. Yes, he was hurt. His feelings were trampled, but Zachary was strong. He did not become bitter towards the whole world, and he was a loving son. The woman sincerely believed and prayed daily that Zachary would find truly loving parents, and soon her prayers were answered. One day, Alice Smith came across Zachary's picture in the database of children for adoption. The sad expression on the blonde-haired boy's face and his adult gaze caught her eye. It was as if he was saying, "Help me, Mom, save me." And when the woman noticed that the baby had sick eyes, she could not hold back her tears. The desire to take him in occurred immediately. Despite living on the other side of the country and having 2 daughters with her husband, Alice had no doubt that Zachary would be their long-awaited son. In the evening, she told her husband, Edward, everything. "Let's make this baby's life joyful, happy, and kind. I'm sure 100% that we can do it," said Alice. And when she showed her husband the picture of the child, he exclaimed, "He will be our new baby. And by the way, he's blonde like you?" When the boy was told that his new parents were coming to visit him, he didn't know whether to be happy or sad. He really wanted to have a mother and a father, but at the same time he was afraid of losing everything, just like he had the last time. But Mrs. Morgan reassured him that there was no need to doubt, and that everything would be fine. He pressed his cheek to her wrinkled face and hugged her neck. All of Zachary's doubts were dispelled when Alice and Edward showed up at the orphanage. The blonde woman with blue eyes and a kind smile immediately won Zachary's heart. She seemed like a princess from a fairy tale to him. Edward took him in his arms and lifted him up high, taking his breath away with pleasure. Zachary felt their warmth and care at once. Craving love and tenderness, he reached out to them, hoping that the beautiful fairy tale would never end. When Alice and Edward left, Mrs. Morgan said that they would surely come back for him. And so they did. The Smiths honorably withstood the battle with the bureaucratic machine to adopt Zachary. When the long-awaited document was received, Edward and Alice took the boy to their home. Now Zachary lived by the sea, had 2 little sisters and a large dog with kind eyes. Thanks to the tenderness and care of his loved ones, Zachary never felt like a stranger or rejected again in his life.